Many have likened what has happened here to a Ponzi scheme. I don't get the impression that that was the original intention. Certainly I don't think that they set out to defraud people. It seems to me that people got reckless, and then they got greedy, and eventually it all came to tears. What's your take, Patrick?
Well, I was quoted in the press, and I think that's what Peter is saying about the Ponzi scheme. Now, I made a comment about it becoming a Ponzi scheme, and I still hold that. And I don't want to go into that in any great detail. It clearly did not start off as that. You use the word morphed, which seems to be a thing that they're using a lot in relation.
Well, give credit. Afro Raymond in this Sunday's Guardian used it beautifully. He wrote a very good piece.
And in the end, what is a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme is a scheme whereby they borrow money from you
from
at
Peter
a high
to
rate
pay
of
Paul.
interest to pay Peter to pay Patrick. All right, and there is evidence, and some of that was happening coming down to the end.
Yes.
And if I say Ponzi scheme at that point in time, I stand by it from that point of view. What started in the 90s was not a Ponzi scheme. It was high risk, and in that sense. And my own feeling is that under these conditions, it is very tempting, just as how some financiers go into selling cocaine to pay off debts and so on. One of the risks that companies like that run is precisely that. So I turn up today, because the run had started some time ago. I turn up today to withdraw my money, and you can no longer convince me to roll it over, as was happening before. Then you have to find somebody to replace what I have done. And in fact, you may have to find somebody to come in to pay me. And that is the kind of thing that...
And to do that, you might have to charge...
And that is the Ponzian elements.
We're coming back to all of this. We go to a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to CNC3's special edition on the Clico crisis. I'm Jeremy Matuk. My guests this evening are Government Senator Patrick Watson, Peter Pamel of the Clico Policyholders Group, and Douglas Camacho, President of ATIC. During this segment, we will take a couple of questions starting at the top of the hour, so don't call before the top of the hour. That's about 5 minutes away. Gentlemen, I know you want to talk about Ponzi schemes and stuff, but I want to move on.
Actually, I don't want to talk about Ponzi schemes.
No, I want to ask a question.
I have to make a comment, Jeremy, on Ponzi scheme. My policyholders will not forgive me. Trust me.
Make it short.
Yeah. I beg to differ with my colleague and friend of long standing, Patrick, here, because my understanding of a Ponzi scheme is one where you have no underlying assets. What you have is
we know that.
The investors paying the earlier investors is like a revolving door.
Pyramid.
A revolving door. And when you can't get any more persons coming in the door, the thing crashes. That certainly was not the case at Clico. There are solid assets underlying the Clico.
Well, we said,
so I think we could disagree. I could disagree, okay. Patrick.
Point taken. Point taken. Yes. Let's shift gears a second. I mean, we want to cover all the different sides of this problem.
Sure.
Important question. We saw the kinds of political contributions that were made by Clico to both political parties in several successive elections. Did those political contributions, and they were massive, did they compromise this issue? Who wants that hot potato?
Well, I don't know if it's a hot potato, because you could never be sure what compromised the issue and what made people make the decision.
Yeah, someone gives you $5 million for elections.
Sure.
Are you going to call in their bank?
Sure, but I don't know that was at the heart of the problem, quite frankly. The political contributions, per se.
Douglas, flags are being flown since
Absolutely.
I mean, come on.
But I don't think that the political contributions was at the heart of it. I think at the heart of it, from my perspective, from ATIC, where we sit looking at the way the legislation is at the moment, is to move on an enterprise like that from the regulatory perspective is fraught with a lot of problems, because in the legislation before, they brought the little piece that both sides of the House, and it's interesting to note, both sides supported, if you remember, when the legislation came that they referred to as the amendment. What that legislation did was effectively gave the regulator the authority to step into the situation, and that if it was challenged in court, the courts would have to overrule the legislator. Whereas what happened before was when the legislator stepped in and people challenged, the legislator had to wait for the courts to give them the authority to act, which was quite different from them being able to act.
So their hands were basically tied.
Their hands were tied. And on the occasions, for those whose memory is not so short, when they went into the insurance companies that in fact ended up being closed down in the early days, Winshaw and, if you remember, USL and so on, they were accused, in fact, of trying to move in, being blocked in the courts for 4 or 5 years. And when they eventually were able to move in, they say, in that period of time, they were a contributor to the collapse, but they said, but we couldn't even move in. And so I think the concern all around was to move, you had to have the authority.
Okay.
And that authority, I think, is what was vested in that little piece of
I
legislation.
think that's a fair answer. I think that's a fair answer. Douglas, what about the smaller companies in the insurance and financial sectors? I understand that they're part of the cause of the delay in having the revised regulations passed. Is that so, and what is your comment?
Well, I wouldn't say...
It's been 20 months we've been hearing about the regulations.
Absolutely.
We haven't seen anything go to Parliament.
I don't think that they're the cause now.
Okay.
But I think in the past, a number of insurance companies certainly did not want the legislation modernized, because modernization meant proper capitalization, tighter controls, requirements for proper governance structures, and a lot of them felt that they would not be able to meet the requirement either for capital and or for the governance. And so what they sought to do was block it from ever getting to the Parliament. And I think that has certainly, I am in the industry just short by about 3 weeks, 30 years, and it's 20 years we're talking about modernizing this legislation.
Let me say something though about the tendency and your question, the question and the way it was asked would tend to give the impression that the regulation as it stands is bad.
It's not bad, it's just weak.
It's outdated
Well,
and weak.
I'm going to respond to that too. Regulation is always going to be behind action.
Absolutely.
Because people are always looking for ways to beat
Good
the regulator. The central bank governor himself had indicated that Clico was doing some, I think he used the word creative ways of avoiding the legislation, legally avoiding the legislation at times. The important point, and this is something that has come up today, is, and this question was asked from the very beginning, the regulations were good enough, in my view, to see what was happening with Clico and to see the gaping hole that was appearing in the statutory fund. Somebody was asleep at the wheel.